There's a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism incidents around the country. This weekend, right here in New York, swastikas and anti-Jewish graffiti found scrawled inside a subway car. Passengers scrubbed it off using hand sanitizer. And in Chicago, police searching for a person who smashed windows at a synagogue and posted swastika decals. And federal authorities are investigating dozens of bomb threats called into Jewish community centers in 26 states over the past month. I want to bring in now Rabbi Gartner of Trua, the rabbinic call for human rights. Sorry for messing that up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, God.
The important reason that you're here, though, is you had a big march tonight in New York City. What motivated you to do this?
Well, just connecting to your statement about the what went on in the subways, it was sort of amazing for us. We are an organization that represents 1,800 rabbis and our congregants, but 200 of us gathered here in the same place on the same line where these anti-Semitic slurs were written on the subway. We were up on the streets marching down that same path, but for another reason. We are, you might think, why are rabbis marching in the street, right? Well, that's sort of odd. Well, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures.
What message are you trying to send to the Trump administration?
As people who know what it's like to be banned and to run and to be refugees, and whose religious imagination tells us to stay sensitized to the plight of the refugee, and whose history tells us to stay vigilant against drip by drips against democracy that start with refugees and start with the marginalized, we're saying that we cannot tolerate the type of executive orders that we are seeing these days, particularly the Muslim ban.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I would think in New York City, which is a city that embraces all kinds of people. I was surprised we could put some of the things on the subway up to see these sorts of things on the subways. Words, swastikas, words that were saying like Jews belong in the oven, drawn on a subway car. That was really shocking to me. I have to play devil's advocate though, because the president's daughter, converted, is married to a Jewish man. They're raising their children as Jews. So you said you want to send a message to the administration, but is it fair to sort of paint the administration or the president or the first family that way?
Anti-Semitism shares a lot of contours with other forms of bigotry, but has a lot of unique features. And some of that relies on the semblance of power, the token, the momentary power that Jews sometimes have or others are made to believe that we have. And at the same time, all of these messages that are being dog whistled, that are quiet, that only really if you're tuned in and sensitized to them can you see, happen at the same time as we're saying, on the one hand, we have these very visual instances of small instances of Jews with some power. So it's eerie the way it works, and it's different than some of the other oppressions that we see.
So you think even in a family that is that way, that those sort of dog whistles can get by them, or?
I think they're getting by. I mean, if we look at the advertisement from the week right before the election, I showed that advertisement to a group of students of all different faiths at the university where I work, and all the Jews in the room saw
the advertisement.
The advertisement that talked, that was right at the end of the campaign. It featured Yellen and Soros,
yes, I remember that, yeah.
Right, and when it used those names, those folks who had images of money and power, and the Jews in the room saw it and were struck and pained by it, and the non-Jewish students in the room didn't even see it. Yeah. So yes, I believe
the campaign denied that
happening.
When it happened. My question is also to remember the Holocaust Remembrance Statement that was put out last week by the administration. They didn't explicitly mention Jewish people, even though so many Jewish people died during the Holocaust. Do you think that was intentional?
Oh, I think we know it was intentional.
Why so?
Well, we've heard that it was in the statement and then taken out of the statement. We also, people talk about messaging. We talk about messaging of the administration, but this is deeper than messaging, and this is something that you can't sanitize by a simple swipe away. This is a deep-seated orientation that is repeatedly, in subtle and overt ways, making these kinds of statements that are trying to erase our history. That was extremely bitterly painful. And I have to tell you, I went to a Catholic girls' school a few days later, and they did a Holocaust remembrance ceremony, and they featured Jews, as most of us, along with everybody else, right? And it was so healing for me to see that the messages that we may be getting from certain places are not being echoed across the country.
As I understand, the State Department did mention Jews in their statement, and the White House later did not, or maybe took that out.
That's how I understand it as well.
So there are a couple things that I want to talk to you about, because you have the support of Israel from this president who says, Israel's our #1 ally and we must protect Israel. But then in this country you're seeing things like this, and you're saying it's because things are getting by, and in some ways you do find the Trump administration at fault for some of it. So what does this administration need to do to make sure that Jews feel safe in this country, here at home?
I think first and foremost is to stop stop the dog whistling and stop the subtle messages and the leaving out, but also then the opposite of that is to make some strong statements. Nothing that has come out of that administration has been really clearly supportive and positive, and the messaging has all been negative. So some of it is messaging and some of it is digging deep and really examining itself and saying, we're not just here, in Judaism we teach, if I'm only for myself, if I'm not for myself, who will be? Okay, well, we're hearing that a lot from the Trump administration. But what we also teach is if I am only for myself, who am I? What have I become? Mm-hmm. And our fear is, what are we becoming? Yeah. What are we becoming?
What's next after this march?
Well, that's the
the $1,000,000 question.
That's the $1,000,000 question. We have 18 rabbis of the 18,000 rabbis that we represent with Trua that were arrested for this action, for a peaceful action. I think you're going to see more standing up in the streets, more pushing back, more resistance, more staying alert, but also being smart about using the tools of our democracy that we have to push them to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, Trua, the rabbinic call for human rights. Thank you, Rabbi Rachel Gartner.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Straight ahead is the White House being influenced by white supremacists. We're going to talk about that. Growing reports of anti-Semitic incidents across the country. Let's discuss now. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach is the author of Israel Warrior, and CNN political commentator Peter Beinart, a contributor to The Atlantic. Thank you both for coming on. This is a very serious subject that I want to talk about. Rabbi Shmuley, I appreciate it. Just a few minutes ago, we discussed this recent spate of displays of anti-Semitic incidents in our country, New York City and Chicago, Rice University in Texas. We're talking about the major university, two major cities. Does it seem to you that anti-Semitism is on the rise?
Well, if you just attend any synagogue around the United States, you'll know that it's on the rise because there's never been security like there is today in front of Jewish day schools, in front of Jewish houses of worship. But a lot of it is not just connected with the rise of white supremacists, which of course is concerning, and no one needs to teach the Jewish community about how we can suffer under white supremacists. The Holocaust was just 70 years ago. But it's also connected with hatred of Israel. And when you have countries like Iran that are allowed to threaten a second Holocaust with impunity, and they are not called out for their genocidal intent or their abrogation of the 1948 UN Anti-Genocide Convention, which expressly forbids genocidal intent, if you can speak about the Jewish people in a form of annihilatory intent without paying a penalty, then Jewish life is demeaned and cheapened. So I don't think we could just discuss the rise of white supremacists and how that affects anti-Semitism in America. We have to also speak about the assault on the state of Israel as a Jewish entity and how it leads to hatred of Jews.
Okay, but let's talk about the rise here in the United States, because some are saying, and if you've heard the rabbi who was on before, is saying that she believes that part of it is the rise of Trump and the Trump administration. I know that you have been friends with Donald Trump and Steve Bannon for a while, but they believe that Bannon's Breitbart inflammatory comments that you see on Breitbart and so on, that it may be influencing White House policy and thusly so anti-Semitism. Are they wrong?
Well, no one would decry and deplore white supremacists more than me as a Jew. Having said that, I'm not here as a spokesman for Breitbart or the administration, but Breitbart has been very strongly pro-Israel. They have a Jerusalem bureau. They have gone against the BDS boycott against Israel. So I don't know if you can attribute it to that, to be perfectly honest. And Trump has at least taken on Iran, who are testing ballistic missiles. Yesterday they said it would take 7 minutes to destroy Tel Aviv. These are very serious things. And not to give the administration any credit for standing up for Israel when we saw the UN condemn Israeli settlements while Arab children were being blown to smithereens in Aleppo, and there was no UN Security Council resolution against that. The administration administration and the last weeks of the Obama administration were far more focused on Jews building condominiums in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria than Arab children dying. That seems to be a form of prejudice and bigotry, and I think the administration kind of reversing some of that.
Peter?
Look, I'm not here to say that Breitbart is anti-Semitic. I actually think that Breitbart has been much, much more bigoted towards Muslims than it has been towards Jews. But I do think it's important to recognize that it's entirely possible to both be anti-Semitic and pro-Israel. In fact, many people throughout the last 100 years have been anti-Semitic and pro-Israel for a very simple reason. They didn't want the Jews in their country. They wanted the Jews to go somewhere else. So I think these need to be discussed as separate topics. I think that Donald Trump has done several things over the last few years that are disturbing. I'm not saying he's an anti-Semite. I don't know his soul, but things that have encouraged anti-Semites. Going back a few years ago when he referred to Jon Stewart repeatedly as John Leibowitz. Why did he do that? His final ad in the final ad of his campaign, where he showed 3 Jews, Soros, Yellen, and Blankfein, and spoke in very classically anti-Semitic terms about global power structure, global power interest. I'm not saying Trump is an anti-Semite. I'm not saying Bannon is an anti-Semite. I'm not saying Breitbart is anti-Semitic. But I do think that there are anti-Semites who have taken aid and comfort from some of the things that Trump has done.
Do you think that the website Breitbart is, the platform for the alt-right, as Bannon said?
Yes, no, what the alt-right means, I think Breitbart has peddled hatred against Muslims. I think there's no question about it. I think they've actually been much, much softer on Jews, but I think Donald Trump has done some things, retweeting an anti-Semitic image that, at the very least, suggests that he's not been careful on this subject.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, but we have to be honest about what constitutes a real threat, Peter. In the final analysis, Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah that threaten genocide against the Jewish people on a regular basis and were not called out by the previous administration. President Obama gave $200 million to the Palestinian Authority as he left office. This, as they used that money, giving $300 million a year to terrorists that really do kill Jews. They don't write things about Jews. They don't defame Jews. They actually murder them, slaughter them, and kill them. That money was given without congressional authority. That money was sent already. So you have to distinguish between threats that are very uncomfortable and they should be condemned versus real threats. You published an article a few days ago condemning all of modern Orthodox Judaism for producing Jared Kushner.
Okay.
You condemned your own religion and your own people.
Let him answer. Let him answer.
Okay. I happen to go to a modern Orthodox synagogue myself. I have for decades. I think that as the Torah says 36 times more that we as Jews would remember the heart of the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. It says that more than that Jews should maintain the Sabbath. For a high-ranking Jew in the Trump administration, to do nothing while Trump
Let him finish.
To do nothing and stand by when you have influence in this administration, when the United States turns its back on refugees, when we are a community that made up of immigrants and refugees, I believe that's shameful. And I believe
You're blaming Judaism?
You
blame Islam for terrorism?
Excuse me, you're interrupting me. If a particular mosque had produced a large number of people who were peddling anti-Semitic filth, I would say they needed to do some self-reflection. The institutions that produced the moral indifference of Jared Kushner need to ask themselves hard questions. That was my point.
Peter, I'll let you speak, but you can't filibuster. With all due respect, you can't hold Judaism accountable. I find that astonishing. Those people who
I was holding the institutions
people who wrongly
that
blame
Jared
Islam
Kushner
for terrorists
accountable.
and say that Islam is a militant religion are bigoted against Islam. And what you said about Judaism is bigotry against your own faith. Just a moment, please.
But what's more?
Hold on,
Peter,
and you're also
completely changing the subject from the conversation we were supposed to be having. You notice
what is
this,
critical is that while President Obama was president, we begged him to do something in Syria.
Okay, hold on.
For
Rabbi, hold on. Hey, hold on, Peter. The default is to go back to the Obama administration. The Obama administration is over. I'm asking you about the Trump administration.
The default is to put values ahead of partisanship in politics. Those people.
No, I'm asking you about a conversation. I'm asking you about a conversation that is taking place in the present.
Correct.
And the reality is, not an alt reality. The reality is that it's the Trump administration now. It's not the Obama administration. Every time someone comes on, they speak for Donald Trump, and it's something that they don't like, they go, oh, well, the Obama administration did this as a deflective, shiny thing. Let's talk about the Trump administration's responsibility.
I will criticize the Trump administration on
the former
refugees,
administration that you cannot go back and change history.
Correct. I will criticize the Trump administration on refugees. I'm a Jew. Peter is right. We must welcome in the stranger. The point I'm making is the reason why our country is so divided is all of us are guilty of putting partisanship in politics before values. What are the values? refugees, human life is of infinite value. And that means that every administration, from the previous ones to the present one, must welcome in refugees. But the people who are now faulting only this administration, Syria has been a problem for years. We must do something about it. We have to create safe zones. I think there should be no-fly zones. President Trump should pick up the phone right now to Vladimir Putin and say, you want a relationship with me? You're the master of Syria. You control. Bashar Assad is Putin's puppet. He should order the end of the carnage in Syria immediately. It's not just about welcoming refugees. It's about stopping genocide, stopping genocide, stopping genocide.
All right, Rabbi. Let me just get your response on the. I'll give you the last word on the current
Look, I agree that the Obama administration did not do enough, and that this is one of the signature stains on Obama's presidency. I agree with that. But now we have a situation, an unprecedented situation, where a president is saying we are not going to allow in any refugees. It seems to me this is a moral crisis for Americans, and especially for Jews, given our history. It's a time for us to stand up.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Peter. Fascinating conversation. I'll see you soon. Coming up, President Trump defends Vladimir Putin again, and even members of his own party are angry.